A warm welcome to our panelists and participants. I'm Juliet Palmer, President of the Board of the Canadian New Music Network. I'm originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, the place where everyone wants to be during the pandemic, but I now make my home in Toronto, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. CNMN brings together music and sound creators, producers, performers, educators, and listeners, offering resources and opportunities for mutual exchange and learning. Based in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Indigenous land of which the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are the recognized custodians, CNMN's membership spans the territories of the many nations of Turtle Island. Tonight, we're excited to present the third in the Decolonization Conversation series, and we're grateful for the support of the Canadian League of Composers and the Canadian Music Centre. Thank you both. Our discussion, Process versus Product, is led by Olivia Shortt, multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, noisemaker, improviser, composer, sound designer, curator, producer, and activist, and the person with the shiniest backdrop tonight. Olivia is joined by Olivia Davies, Kim Senklip Harvey, Marion Newman, and Tyler J. Sloane. Welcome, and I hand it over to you, Olivia.
Miigwech, Juliet, and I am so excited to be having this conversation with these amazing panelists and with everyone in this space virtually with us tonight. For me, this whole pandemic has been definitely a time of reflection, a time to look at how I've been making art, how I've been making art with other people. What does collaboration actually look like? And so in talking about the process versus product, I have found that a lot of mostly Western-based organizations tend to focus on getting to the end product. And in actually taking more time with the process, how do we actually make better the end product? How do we make the people working with us feel safe, feel heard, feel valued? And there's so many ways that we can do this. And a lot of organizations have been using words like decolonize and indigenizing spaces. And what I want to explore a little bit tonight with these four amazing panelists is what that actually means to them, how they do it in their own practice. These four wonderful panelists tonight, we have Olivia C. Davies, we have Kim Senklip Harvey, Marion Newman, and Tyler J. Sloane. And they are all amazing artists as well as producers in their own right. And so what I want to do is first have everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the conversation. So I would like to start with Marion Newman, and then after we'll go to Ty.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Marion Newman. I go by she, her pronouns. I am originally from Vancouver Island. Souk is where I've grown up and where my family home still is. I'm Kwagylth and Stalo, and Kwagylth is from the territory surrounding the northern tip of Vancouver Island, and Stalo is in the Fraser Valley, as we now know it. I now live in Toronto, and did I already say I'm a mezzo-soprano?
Not yet.
That's about it. Okay, there we go. That's me.
Miigwech, Marion. So we'll go to Ty next, and then Kim afterwards.
Ani, hello, my name is Tyler J. Sloane. I go by they, them pronouns. I am a non-binary, two-spirit, Anishinaabe, Chinese, Irish, Greek, mixed race, mixed gendered, multidisciplinary, all-round basket case. I have only been in Toronto for 4 years. I originally hail from Winnipeg, Manitoba. My arts practice is primarily performance art, as well as a critical focus on assisting and helping launch to us LGBTQIA plus artists who are marginalized and living on the fringes. And I work at Sketchworking Arts as a performance arts artist associate, and currently I am the youth facilitator host for the In Conversation series at Buddies in Bad Times Theater.
Miigwech, Ty. And we'll go to Kim and then Olivia C. Davies afterwards.
Bye, Hunitha. My name's Kim. On my mother's side, I come from the Silkoteen and the Decal nations. And then on my father's side, I come from the Silk. We've got ancestral ties to the Shohetmik and the Tunaka. I'm currently on Kwantlen territory, so near Marion's home territory. I was like, Stolo, what up? So I'm representing and like generously like grateful to be on your home territory, Marion. And I also work on the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, colonially known as Vancouver. My artistic practice is as an Indigenous theorist and cultural evolutionist, and I use a variety of modalities to ensure that my people have equity and the opportunity to live peacefully. Artistically, that can look like plays, TV writing, my blogs, podcasts, social media, all in service to my people. I work sovereignly, so I'm not attached to an organization. I've worked in child welfare. I worked as a public servant on all different levels, municipal, provincial, and federal. And at this phase of my career, my sovereignty artistically is something that I'm really cherishing and honored to explore, and I think really important in the ecology of artistic practice. So I am an independent artist.
Miigwech Kim. And Olivia C. Davies, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Nani Boujou, Olivia C. Davies. Thank you so much for inviting me here, Olivia, and to each of the fellow speakers. I'm so excited to get into conversation with you. I am currently on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, although I'd spent the last 9 years and continue to work, live, and play as well on unceded Coast Salish territory, also known as Vancouver. And my ancestral roots draw back to a mixed heritage of Anishinaabe, of French Canadian, of Irish, Welsh, and Finnish, and probably more that I haven't fully explored, but learning and doing the research and asking the questions. So so grateful to have a contemporary Indigenous dance practice that I can call my own, my home. My body is my home. I run a small arts company called Odella Arts, and I curate the Matriarchs Uprising Festival of Contemporary Indigenous Dance. And yeah, my communities, I would say, are also the community arts community, as well as the dance community across Canada, and now reaching into the States and Australia and New Zealand and wherever those threads will take me. So yeah, thank you so much, Miigwech.
Miigwech, it's actually really fun to have another Olivia on the panel. I don't often get to say my name this much. So tonight is going to be a conversation between the five of us, and tonight is really just an opportunity for these wonderful artists whose work spans such a large breadth of genres and art forms and just different ways of thinking about art making. And this is just really a time for the four of you to discuss your values, what's important to you. You know, you can even talk about what you hope to see, and essentially what I'm hoping to get from this, and I hope that the listeners get from this, is you know, a learning opportunity to see, maybe pluck things from what you each do and bring it into their own practices. And I'll probably be doing the same thing. They'll be taking notes, being like, "Oh yes, that's a great idea." But I wanted to start with just asking each of you how you engage in your own artistic practices, whether it's as an artist performing or creating or producing or presenting work. What are the things that you know, think of right away? Like if I was someone engaging each of you, you know, what are the things that you need in the room in order to make that space feel comfortable, feel safe, feel like it will be a good space for collaboration? And I would love to start with Marion, if you could shine and enlighten us on that.
Yeah, I think I've come to my list of things that I like to ask for ahead of time through experience and through doing something and realizing what was missing. So it's definitely been something, it's a list that I continue to build. And it's also a list of challenges that I've gone through that have made me stronger and made me more outspoken and turned me into the person that I am today, and that I've learned an awful lot from, sometimes painful and sometimes not. So yeah, I like to be consulted ahead of time, like long before everything is settled, I think. And something that I've been asking for is for artists to be part of the consulting process right from the conception of the idea. And an example that I have of that recently is Calgary Opera via Bramwell Tovey reached out to me to ask if I would consider dramaturging a piece. And I've never dramaturged before. So I was excited by the idea. And after a little bit of discussion, Bramwell convinced me that through the experiences I've had already, I do know what I'm doing enough to do that job. And also Bramwell gave me the reins entirely to choose a team, to choose how, to choose what. And to be given that kind of agency was incredible. I invited Yvette Nolan to write a libretto because we've worked together before, and I've learned a lot about how to decolonize a rehearsal and a process through Yvette. I invited Ian Cuson because I really love singing his music, and I just think he writes really beautifully for the voice and just like breaks open the barriers of like what is classical, what is new music, and what are Indigenous artists allowed to create. And Parmala Tarawala, who brings, I've mostly worked with as a performer. We've been on stages together. And Parmala is also an ethnomusicologist, which is a word and something I've been thinking a lot about, like who gets to be called a composer, etc. And I've had lots of amazing discussions with Parmala about that. And Parmala composes too, and brings a history of working in a new way, an improvisatory way. I think that is really interesting. So that kind of process where I'm given total agency is ideal.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering, Olivia, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Happily, yeah. I think just maybe tagging on to come out, excuse me, to a couple of the thoughts that you offered, Marion, this idea of agency. And I think as I was thinking about this question, the idea of like flattening our hierarchy to destabilize things in such a way where, you know, regardless of who is the commissioner and who's the artist, it comes to a place where we're all valuing one another's voices and opinions. And yes, there's probably going to need to be somebody who lands on that final decision, but how are we working in collaboration truly to feel like those voices are heard and respected, and that there's space given. I think something about time and slowing down time has been, as I take a breath and saying that, has been so essential to landing in a place where, especially as a curator of a festival, ensuring that my artists aren't feeling the everything else that might be going on around them by technicians, by, you know, festival, other, you know, whatever, whoever else is there. But that when they come into the theater and they're about to go into the world of whether it's their dress rehearsal or their performance, they feel they get all the time they need to actually land in space to carry out whatever protocols they may have already let me know that they're going to have to you know, have the time and space to do. And then I think just in my own way, if I'm that collaborating artist, like, yeah, I kind of want to sit outside with you before we go into the theater. I want to just like, let's all ground down and center and feel, you know, feel what it is to be in relationship with one another before we go into that workspace where relationships are already going to have their kind of, I'm talking with my hands, but what I'm trying to say is they're going to have some, you know, stereotypical relationship vibes that I think if we can, you know, I've loved the process of sitting outside and having a coffee with someone before we go into the space to really just like, hey, let's zoom in on just being humans before we go into our roles of whatever it is we're going to do next. Yeah.
I wanted to say something about that. I absolutely love that you brought that up. Food and coffee, or just, you know, having that time together, and the fact that you said to, you know, be humans together first. I agree with totally. Like I find, at least, I'm so much more playful and like willing to do things with people if I actually have had the time to get to know them versus just walking into the room and starting a rehearsal without really knowing anyone. I always find that so jarring. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, like just having that as part of the rehearsal, schedule too, like blocking out a few hours to like have a lunch together or whatever meal, and just be able to sit. And especially like when I've done shows in the past, having having an elder present too, to have that meal with you. So right, like thank you for saying that. Could we go to Kim next?
I'm gonna go in for it. I want respect and equitable power. Before we even get to the room, I'm investing in requesting processes that make getting everything that Olivia and Marion said. It's not like they're doing us a favor, that these organizations have the cultural competency to understand that these are requirements for us to do our job. And for me, that goes back to a process where, in terms of my ceremonial work around fire creation, journeying, I don't want to be asked when we're already on the journey or when the fire is already lit what we need. We should be given the respect, the authority, and the artistic sovereignty to be given a seat at the table when those decisions are being made. Yeah. And if those aren't happening, then to me, it's really lip service. And it's like a very surface level amount of decolonization where they're just kind of tap dancing to hit a few decolonial inclusion boxes to like waft some smudge around for us. And I call bullshit on all of that, because I think for real power dissemination to occur, there has to be some accountability for the racist and white supremacist systems that we've inherited and are forced, all of us, to face and deal with and dismantle by the time we're allowed to say, don't fucking hustle me. My artists need time to be able to arrive, and we will not tap dance for this white institution anymore. And so the requirements that I have are really way before we get to that first day, are building relationships with people, which is why for my next piece, Break Horizons, we created a living treaty, which talk about rights, methodologies, and pedagogies before we even get to the production, that we all sign on to the relationship, that we acknowledge the racist ecology, artistic ecology that we've had, and that equity is not going to be convenient. Anti-racist work is going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to cost you. And so I also want resources so that I don't have to fight for anti-racist and equitable environments. I shouldn't have to, please, sir, can I have some more, to try and fix or decolonize all of Canadian theater for this one organization for like $50 fucking. Like, what? No, sorry, not here for that.
Love it. Thank you, Kim. Ty, can I go to you next?
I'm so sorry. I'm just like, I gotta admit, I'm an emerging artist. I am someone who is also reclaiming and on my journey of dismantling the white supremacy that I grew up in. I'm an adoptee, which is really crucial for me, who's been removed from a lot of my cultures, many of them. And so I bring that up only because as the other three were speaking, I was like, I have nothing to add. But what I will say that where my labor has been surfacing in the last couple of years is that I'm not perhaps near the place where I'm able to have the foresight or the forethought or the teachings to be able to come up with negotiations and treaties and ways of having respect. But I'm very, very, very good at calling it out when it's not happening for myself or for someone else. Specifically when that other person is a trans person, when that other person is a Black person, a person of color, and especially when that's another Indigenous body in the room. I think that one of the things that I find intriguing about working with various organizations, and I'm someone who works within like the theater industry and the community arts industry, and then multidisciplinary different organizations who kind of ebb and flow and intersect with those places, is that they really do like to rely on us in the midst of the process, which is why I was a little flabbergasted right when it got turned to me, because what Kim touched on is what is not only something that I wish I new for myself as an Anishinaabe person, as a Chinese person, but also what I wish other people would go into, because I'm someone who has been conditioned to still ask for permission within this state of capitalism, white supremacy. And so having a moment of like feelings being bubbled up right in this present moment after hearing the three of you is just is a way that decolonizing a space is happening, but it's also a way that it's very potently connecting things for me right now, rather than me being able to perhaps offer experiences where I'm able to come affirmed in my value and in what I need to be in a process.
If Ty, I hope you don't mind. I don't mean to speak for you, but because I've worked with Ty, I worked with Ty on a project last year, and we're currently working together on another one right now. You, like many people, I think, invite people into your space, whether it's virtual or in person, who you trust. I think that's a big thing to talk about, is like who, when you do have power to, you know, invite people in who you want to work with and collaborate with, and you especially, because I have worked with you and I know what it's like to be in a space with you. You are so inviting, and I think whether it's, you know, at the forefront or not for you, at least from what I've seen, like you invite in people who make the space safe and like make it comfortable, and who are not going to be problematic, and who are really wonderful and genuine. And like, so I just wanted to say that like you bring a lot to the work that you do, and all of you do, but I'm just working with Ty right now, so I'm able to say that off the top of my head.
I think what that, so like my recent mentors in the last couple of years is folks like Lily Davis and Natty Tremblay and Lila Pine, and many other individuals too, Yolanda Bonnell, Cole Alvis, and so I think what I'll say about the invitation is that I've learned from all of those individuals I just named are not Anishinaabe, sorry, are Indigenous, and most of them are two-spirited too. And so I think there's like that kind of twofold. I exist, and I think many other individuals who perhaps are tuning in exist in a space where we're beginning to witness teachers and elders and mentors show us what that space making looks like, so that hopefully we get to this space where a lot of my fellow panelists get to like start in a good place for them and for the process and for the relationships that they get to have. And so there's two I think right now there's like two witnessings happening.
Agreed. The other thing that I wanted to kind of ask the group, and I'm jumping around a little bit in our questions that I sent to them in advance, but I want to hear a little bit about your experiences as far as support goes. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you have been in spaces where, you know, there are multiple Indigenous people, there's multiple queer people, there's multiple artists of color. Like, I want to hear more about those experiences and what it's been like to feel supported and to feel, I keep using the word safe, and that doesn't always encapsulate everything I'm meaning, but in some ways it does. Like for me, it's very much that, like that feeling of safety, being able to speak comfortably, being able to ask for help. And I'm really curious about each of your experiences, and if anything comes to mind. I'm wondering, Kim, would it be all right if I go to you next?
Of course. Yeah. So I was a product of the trauma wave of Indigenous stories in Canadian theater, where I say it was a lot of dying and crying, a lot of let's kill women as a plot device, let's harm Indigenous women as a narrative, well-made play structure bullet point. And I was not afforded the opportunity to have any safety or care or cultural competency in these spaces, because that was the like gross imperial patriarchal methodology of like leave your shit at the door, don't bring your stuff in, which is actually impossible. I don't know, actually, that's such a bullshit approach. And I left theater to work in child welfare because I said, if this is the way that they want to do business, this goes against all of my values. This was traumatizing. This is not why I became a storyteller. learned ethical and meaningful engagement practices within the child and social welfare world, worked with the National Center of Excellence for Youth Engagement, and actually learned around how you pull and commune people together ethically, or at least understanding what that means. And then I came back to theater, fortunate with great mentors talking to me about how you can create space for some of our most marginalized and oppressed individuals, which happen to be Indigenous children in foster care. And so for me, I was able to pull in the principles of youth safety into a lot of the work that I was doing, because I don't think theater or necessarily the arts is going to reinvent the wheel here. A lot of people in a lot of different sectors have been creating safe spaces for people who've been oppressed, street entrenched, harmed within society, that I think we need to kind of get our head out of the artists are the most intelligent and innovative people in the world, when really we need to look outside of our own sectors to say, what have people been doing to ensure that their artists, people, community members, familia are taken care of in rooms. And so for me, pulling from the youth engagement and social and child welfare world, I was basically able to ask, like, it was a needs-based equity approach. When a young person comes into the room, I don't need to prescribe to them what they need. I need to ask them what they need. And so a lot of my process became that needs-based approach. How can I, as a producer, a director, or a writer, get ahead of potentially the problems of the Imperial Canadian Western Rehearsal Hall and ask people, what is it that you need? And work on my own capacity to ensure that I could steward and sustain that safe environment. Because all too often, it's the first day is really good, or the first meeting's really good, but then, you know, it's kind of, I jokingly say it's a little bit like an accent. A lot of people lose their accent in high emotional scenes of films. All of a sudden they'll be in an English accent, and then the crying scene will come, and then they'll get their American twang. I feel like that happens to our cultural safety practices. As soon as it gets tested a little bit, we lose it, and we're like, back to this way that was super oppressive, because that's just our conditioning. And so I also understand that it's going to take a very long time to create systems that will go well beyond my lifetime, that will hand to Ty, that will hand to, you know, Caitlin Yacht, that will hand to Aaron Wells and the next generation of Indigenous practitioners. But it's my job at this point to say, what is it that we can do to create these safer environments? For things like Kamloopa, we waited 3 days to read the play. We didn't do it on day one. We read it in the arbor. We had a wellness table. I actually asked actors how they were feeling and cared. We took breaks as needed. We stopped rehearsals early. I just listened to what human beings needed in a room. And to me, we were working against the clock. The budget for Kamloopa was, you know, respect to Western Canada Theatre, but dismal. The length of time we had was ridiculous. And so that's to say, just because your resources, finances with regards to time, money, and abilities are short, does not mean that you're not able to meaningfully respect people's spiritual and consistent wellness. You know, so the way I was raised was that if you invite someone to your house, you invite someone into your life, you treat them with respect, you owe them, you're in relationship to them. And the way that my mama raised me was that if I'm going to hire people to put on a play that I wrote, I have a responsibility to them for the rest of my life. And I feel very much that way for Kamloopa and Break. You know, we just had a production meeting today where it was about wellness and stewarding young people to teach new designers, BIPOC designers, about the world. I don't enter into relationships lightly. If I start working with you, I owe it to you. I still buy all of the company members dinner whenever I see them, because I did not pay them enough. We never paid people enough for the work that they do. And for me, it's needs based. It's what can they handle? And also what I'm really working on with Break Horizons is how can I help as an artistic leader build their capacities to be in that room in challenging environments. Artistic practice is hard. Texts are hard. Rehearsal schedules are hard. No money in the world is going to allow us, even in France with the 12-week rehearsal periods, I'm sure they still have problems. So what can we do as artistic leaders to help build the capacities of our artists, invest in them before the product-based opening ejaculatory night, and actually say, how can I help you to make sure that when all of these trying situations come, I have given you everything that I can to help prepare you and help you when I know I will fail you and this system will fail you. And those are the methodologies that I'm interested in investing in, because I think we've owned artists a lot more than what we've given them. We've treated artists in this country as incredibly deplorable, and I refuse to do that anymore. And so for me, the investigations are around investing in the well-being and the sustained piece of the artists who give us so much, and producers have treated like shit for far too long.
I have nothing to add to that. That was amazing. Thank you. And I wanted to go to Olivia next and sort of ask also, as someone who's running a festival and the work that you're doing, if you could also speak to this.
I think I can. Take a breath here. Bring me back, if you will, Olivia. What was your first provocation?
Well, my first provocation was talking about working in rooms and is the support of having, you know, other Indigenous and Black and brown and queer and, you know, other folks in the space that, as I keep saying, make it feel safe, and like having that support and what that's been like and working in that process.
So I think, yeah, okay, because that brought my mind right back into a rehearsal process that has been a really an elongated relationship building amongst other Indigenous creators from various, we're an interesting collective, anyways, I'll say it, Circadia Indigena Collective, who have been working together now since 2016, and we've got, you know, the elder Byron Chief Moon in the room with us, and then we've got JP Longboat, and then we've got Tia Terrera Clear Sky, and Damien Eagle Bear, and then me, and we're all kind of coming from these different backgrounds, but then we get into the room together and we sit and we listen and we just, and it's like, I don't know, I'm going to try to put it into words, but I really feel this circle of ancestral, beautiful energy just kind of like absorb around us when we come together, and that reality has a tangible outcome to what we choose to experiment with. So whether it's a story that Byron's bringing to us from his ancestral lineage, and how we open that up to explore through each of our various tones and ways and shapes, and of course blood memories too. It definitely has the experience that I've never experienced in other worlds of this opening of respect, of this opening of the willingness. I think I was trying to write it down, of like accessing the invisible, and what does that mean? And not that that's supposed to sound so out there that no one can grasp it, but like, you know, that there is a reality to this fact that when we're bringing story into the room and we're allowing ourselves to sit with it before envisioning how it's going to develop into the product, I guess, is yeah, it's just this really awesome, like tingles up my back experience where, you know, I feel like when I'm gathered in that Circadia Indigenous circle, there's so much space for me to, you know, to welcome my, there I'm doing it, like to welcome my grandmothers into the space with me, and feel protected and feel also brave. Like I think you were wondering about that word safe, and I was like, I love that you offered the word brave to us, because I feel brave and confident to like, hey, you know, this just came, let's try this out, and the willingness that we all sort of engender to have that capacity to play in that space that we've created for ourselves. Now I have my own protocols that I'm like pretty kind of insistent about nowadays, but like putting tobacco in my four corners of that space, the four corners of that space, and working with my medicines to ensure that, again, you know, it's like, it's my selfish little spirit being like, do the things you need to feel good, but also with a willingness to like, hey, is this okay? Are we all okay with me going through my protocol practice before we do that? Yeah, anyways, and so all of that's there, and then I think there's finally just this there's this beautiful moment when we get to a point where, you know, if the, you know, I'm thinking just like story's been given and we've all had this like conversation of like what it came out, or how it came out to us, and then landing in the like, where do we want to explore it moments. And again, not thinking of, well, how are we going to share it on the festival stage? But there may be that's that's there. It's in the room too. But this creative exploration practice and the playfulness and the willingness to, to play, I think is maybe a part of how I feel safe and brave when I feel like I have the agency to play. Yeah.
I love that. There's something I wanted to touch on before I get to Marion. There's something that both you, Olivia, and Kim were saying that are kind of just like percolating in the back of my head of things that I've been thinking about, where it's not just about support of, say having other Indigenous people in the room and feeling brave, but also the fact is with the history of this country that's currently known as Canada, um, that there are many Indigenous people at different points in their life and in their own journey of figuring out like their identity and who their family is. And there's so much that people are reclaiming. And so something for even just myself, as an adult, that many of the people that Ty mentioned, like Cole Alvis and Yolanda Bennell, who are these brilliant artists, are some great friends, but also been mentors in a way, because like being able to be in the space with other folks who are more connected and to be able to feel supported in that way too, I think is really valuable for Indigenous folks, for Black artists, for artists of color, like for everybody. Just having your community around you is really important. So I appreciate some of the things you were saying, Kim, in relation to that. And also, I study classical music, and I'm about to go to Marion, who's worked in opera, but like there's definitely these differences when you are in a very focused field of music versus say being in a theater space versus being in a dance space. Even though we are all doing the same types of things, there's sometimes the approach is a little different, especially like Marion, I know you've performed with orchestras, and how that is a very different way of working than say like being in a show that has 3 people. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm really struck by so much of what's being said, because I really feel it all. And it's so exciting to hear these words of wisdom coming from all of you. And I'm also struck by the word mentors, and how I think it's sort of assumed, at least in my upbringing, that mentors are older than you. And I have found recently that that is totally not the case for me. More and more of my mentors are much younger than I am, including my co-founders of Amplified Opera. They're people I draw so much hope and inspiration from. Arya Umezawa, Asata Tenakun, Tea Kasahara. They are so full of ideas, and one of our mandates is brave spaces, creating brave spaces to make sure that we all feel safe and willing and ready and able to do the work that we want to do. And I have definitely come up in this classical music world that there's major hierarchy. I feel like I was a young artist forever. And then suddenly one day in my 40s, someone was like, "You're the leader now." And I was like, "What?" And realized everyone in the cast was younger than me. And I think I was brought up a bit differently to think about ages, instead of thinking about, age as in wisdom, just that there are people, and there are people who I learn from, and it doesn't matter if they were just born or if they're very old or somewhere in between, that everyone has something to offer. And that if I'm listening, I will learn from. And I think that I work with like opera companies and symphonies, and in a lot of cases, they feel like they're trying to do the work. They're trying to find a way to become culturally competent before you get there. But I mean, people don't even know what decolonization means. And when that word started being flung around everywhere, I started to think, what is decolonization? And through really thinking about it, realized I am decolonized in so many ways. And I just had to figure out how to say that. I'm still working on how to say it, how to explain in what ways I am decolonized. But it's just the ways I was raised, the way I watched my parents the react to visitors who showed up at the door, to my dad's way of quietly leading, where it's really just about making sure that everybody's brought into the space and that their voices are all heard so that we can have a discussion and move something along. My mom's insistence that we were homeschooled to undo so many of the effects that residential school perpetrated upon all my relatives on that side of my family. I think I'm sort of losing my place here a little bit, but I definitely bring a lot of baggage. And I realize that a person of my age brings that baggage. And when I look to the younger generations, they don't have the same baggage and they have so much power. And I think I find myself wanting to speak up and to make the space safer for them so that they can be as powerful as they are able to be. And my dream is to get to a point where none of us have to think about that. We just know we are welcome. And we know because companies are following up on the information they were given the last time we did a gig with them, instead of starting again. I love when we sit in a circle that first day of rehearsal and spend that meet and greet time where people are sort of separated all over the room, instead facing each other in a circle, hierarchy flattened. Everyone has a chance to speak. No one interrupts anyone, where we each have a chance to share whatever it is we want to. And in a rehearsal where that happens daily, it might take 15 minutes, which adds up over the course of a 3 or 4 week rehearsal period. But once you've done that landing in your space, you leave behind the outside and you work so much more deeply. You learn to get to know each other so much better. You can trust each other. If you feel teary, you can get that out in the first 15 minutes, and then you're just able to work really hard. And I think that's these little patches of what is decolonization have been showing up in my process, and have been things I've learned to ask for, because I do want spaces to be braver for everyone.
So one thing I wanted to say, and I'm going to say this in front of the audience because I think it is important. Marion was one of the first people I ever saw online where I was like, you know, this amazing Indigenous artist who was doing so much within the realm of classical music, but not just that. And honestly, you've been one of these people before I even got to know you as a person, where you inspired me. Like when I was in my undergrad, I'm a classical saxophonist, I'm not a singer, but just the work that you have done. You're not just performing, you're also like, you run amplified opera, you sit on all these boards. Marion and I worked together with the Circle of Artists as part of the Canadian Opera Company. And, you know, that has been a very big journey. Like even just that whole experience, like scene from the start where it was like you, me, Cole, and Jeremy Dutcher in a meeting, to now what our group has grown to, and like the conversations that we're having with Alexander Neef and the, you know, soon to be the next leader of the Canadian Opera Company. But these conversations have changed so much, even just in the last 2 years. So you're all very inspiring to me. But Marion was like one of these first people and these first names that I you know, were kind of like, you've been a hero to me, like since I was a young adult. And so I very much appreciate everything you do.
I would just like to say that you are one of the most outspoken people who always gets to the point that everyone's itching to say and no one dares. And I've gained so much strength from that. It, like, you don't waste time, and it's perfect. It's like, I love that so much. And I have enjoyed watching the shift of how those meetings are run and who does most of the talking, as they learn that what listening really means. And I mean, I'm having that experience with some of the other boards and that I'm on as well. And it's just one of the companies that I work with is Regina Symphony Orchestra, and Gordon Gerard, their music director, has been a best friend of mine for years and years. And that Indigenous Advisory Committee started as soon as Gordon hit the ground in Regina. Said, I don't want to run a company here without including the Indigenous people who live here, and to look to help, to get them to help us to guide this situation and all of our programming if they're willing. And so for that job, it's like, I'm not from Regina. I am part of that process because I'm a classical musician, but I get to listen to people in the community who are not musicians, but who are Indigenous and live it, who live that experience, who've grown up there, who have connections to all of the communities surrounding that area, and watching them figure out that the symphony's serious about wanting to hear their voices. But it's all been kind of a process, and I'm excited for the day when it's just like, okay, we believe that when we're being asked for our opinion, we're actually being asked to step up and say something. And it's just starting to roll now, and I really don't want it to go away. I don't want it to be just a pandemic thing, but yeah, you are so strong in that space, and I'm going to continue to learn a lot from that.
Something that I think, Marion, you said that really intrigued me and I think is so important to repeat and honor is this notion of artistic leaders following up on the information they were gifted by Indigenous peoples in productions. And I think that's a real problem that kind of permeates all sectors of the arts, where it feels like we're starting from ground zero every production, or that the cultural competency just gets forgotten because it was in short-term memory. And the responsibilities, you know, Olivia, when you talk about what is it, our ideals, or what kind of environments do we want to be stepping into or be stewarding? And I find it very problematic that all of a sudden when the Indians aren't in the building, everything goes out the window. Nobody remembers a thing. It's that there's no actual relationship to be like, you know what Olivia talked about was incredibly important, and we need to invest in some capacity building for my team to ensure that when Olivia comes back, we are for the better for that information. I talk about it too, like all those books you ordered in March about Black Lives Matter, you better read them. Take out the receipts and open up, crack those spines. White people, get into them. Because I think too often we have generous artists who, like Marion and Olivia and Ty, are supposed to be there working, also become the leads of the diversity and inclusion committee with zero pay and zero responsibility. And then there's actually no follow-up. And I don't want to be the head of your diversity and inclusion committee. I have a job to do. I have too many plays to go and write, and I'm way past deadlines on some of them, and I'm not getting paid enough, and you're not investing in the integrity of this relationship to ensure that this information isn't being lost. And I think that's for me, a paradigm difference between the way Indigenous people share knowledge generations and the way, like, how kind of brutal when a leader leaves an organization. It's like they take all of that knowledge with them, and the knowledge transfer process is not a priority for the board of directors to say, how do we steward in all the information that we inherited? And I think non-Indigenous people need to spend, especially those on board of directors and institutional leaders, need to really think about the responsibilities and the generosity Indigenous people continually afford their organizations for no fee at all. That just gets lost into the ether, is not prioritized, is not embedded into their strategic plan, and means it's a lot more work for us. It's disappointing, because for me, when you talk about values, it's really disrespectful. It's like, didn't you have Yolanda in the building here a few months ago? Wasn't Marion and Yvette's and Marie's team just here? Wasn't Olivia here with the festival? What happened? Because I know these are leaders who don't come in and just hope for the better for the next one. I know these are leaders who create environments for us to inherit that are better off and more competent than what they entered in. And I think that responsibility needs to be off the shoulders of the artists on this panel and everyone else who goes into work, who doesn't just gets their equity contract to do their artistic work, but then is also forced and positioned to, because of the racist environments we have to work in, to educate their HR, their publicist, to talk about how you can't be waving around your finger talking about how disgusting it smells in here because my team just smudged. That you guys actually have to, without prompted, go and understand and have a metric of reflection to say, we didn't show up today in a way that was what was required. It was inexcusable, and it wasn't enough. And I think that BIPOC people have been doing the grunt and legwork of this through the Black Rebellion. And I have yet to see white leaders actually start coalition steering committees, subgroups, nation work to actually say, we're going to do better by the Indigenous and Black and people of color who have gifted us so much.
I just need to, speaking on that, I remember a couple months ago when Catherine Hernandez stepped down from Be Current, and I was absolutely sure that if someone like Catherine Hernandez, who's obviously like has abundance in community, has abundance in her artistry and her leadership, I was so sure that the minute that she stepped down, that other executive directors, particularly white executive directors, would follow suit. I was recently in an interview for a position with Elevate Equity, and one of the things that they had asked was with your growth as a leader, what would your exit strategy be if you were to ever depart from us? And one of the things that I said is that if there is ever a moment where an Indigenous or a Black trans woman or an Indigenous and Black woman wants to come into a leadership or my position where I'm holding that position, then it is my job to step down from that role, because in order for us to like decolonize, I really do believe that our leadership in an honorable way, in a way where there's good relations, lies in the matriarchy comparable to the patriarchy, comparable to this capitalist artistic world. Because too often, both in the community arts sector and in the theater sector that I operate in, I hear, well, we don't have enough money to do it. And I was like, why is that always the rhetoric that gets laid out? We didn't have the money to do it, but like this production, this project was able to do it because they set aside money for it. But now that we're in this new area, now that you're coming in, hopefully you can thread what the work that someone else did along for us. And I'm like, that I just feel sorry, that fires me up, because it should as someone who is newly connecting all the intersections of my own identity and trying to be honorable and trying to hold integrity in my own arts practice, especially as I navigate multiple people, I'm just always amazed that other people aren't doing that as earnestly. I'm amazed that they're not trying to visibilize and show the receipts of their work and their continued processes, because we speak on process, like the work is never done, and it should be abundantly more so for so many people that aren't us. Like their work should be abundantly more clear. It should be more transparent. It should be happening actively more than it is. And I'm continuously amazed that there's these loopholes in a way that certain institutions and certain leadership continue to do, despite all of the very blatant leadership that's happening with Indigenous women, that's happening with BIPOC women, that's happening with trans women, who are actively showing us across the board what we need to be doing in order to be moving in a right way and moving in a right relationship. Sorry, I had to share that.
I think, and I just want to add what's so like that ignites within me is this notion of how, and Olivia, you said it, and it was so great in your prompts and provocations for this, about this notion of white people appropriating the term decolonization. It's kind of like in BC, we're dealing with the NDP who adopted UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, and yet are like, bring the pipeline in. We don't care about reserves and clean water. It's ignorant, it's not possible. And what I think leaders need to talk about when we talk about process, and the problem about investing in product versus process is that in a capitalistic sector, you cannot talk about decolonization and not take responsibility and acknowledge how you're entrenched in capitalism, and we are. And for you not to talk about capitalism, patriarchy, and colonization, I don't think you really have a handle on how real systemic change is going to occur. I get that right now we are suckling the tit of capitalism. That's why I try to write shows that still get butts in the seat, that still make you money, so that on the next one, you don't have to do The Sound of Music to make money to pay for the BIPOC show that needs more money in the process, but that we actually understand, and we are business people, we understand that we are in this system, and I understand how this works. But let's have real conversations about how we can start dismantling and removing ourselves from the suction of capitalism to ensure that Indigenous and BIPOC processes are funded on an equitable level. Don't talk to me about decolonization if you can't strictly and transparently and honestly talk about how your organization is founded and will, and as we're seeing in this pandemic, crumble when capitalism crumbles. And what's the first thing to go? Their anti-racist work, because there's no money. They are intrinsically connected, and I do not hear enough leaders talking about how they're trying to remove the power and the hierarchy that's built on capitalism, which is imperial colonialism. And until they start breaking those seams on those books and reading them, we're going to be talking about having diversity committees and doing the one native play and hiring that one consultant to get us through this tough part. But if you can't even put together the fact that our whole industry collapsed because of capitalism, and you want to talk about decolonization, I really have questions about your capacity to lead us and steward us through this. Because here's the other thing. I don't think this is not going to happen again in our lifetime. I think we are in an era where pandemics and capital shutdowns are going to occur. So what are our leaders doing to actually address that? And I'm actually a little terrified that that conversation isn't happening more, because there's no way equitable processes will be invested in until we understand that it's built on a product. And I don't want to deliver a product all the time. I always say this is not for opening night. I could give it about opening night.
Yeah, thank you, Kim Miigwech. I think that's a thing that we need to see leaders of organizations like having these conversations. Like, this is incredibly important. And if I can give a little shout out, I'm a curator at a venue here in Toronto called the Music Gallery. And, you know, coming from classical music, I have found it very hard to find, and even I'm using classical loosely again too, because I do experimental and improv and all the things, but you know, finding those institutions that are actually having these conversations. And to me, I think the Music Gallery is one of the best examples of a mid-sized organization who is doing the hard work, who I often use this description for the previous AD, David Dax. They just hired in this wonderful new artistic director, who I'm very excited to meet, Sanjit. But he's white, and he's one of the few people in my life where I'm like, yes, he's a white man, but he's a man who happens to be white, because he's one of these people where everything you're talking, like that I've heard from the four of you, I see him doing, and he's very transparent about the work that he does. Like, he's made sure to ensure that, like, he is not the lead voice on things, because he realizes what is needed at that organization, and that he stepped down from being artistic director because of a number of factors. But like, how important it is to see organizations doing that kind of thing and having these really hard conversations for them. It's not hard for us to have, but to say, like, there's a problem and we're not addressing it and we're not being transparent. Thank you for saying transparency, because I was like, what is the word I'm looking for? And it's about transparency. Like, organizations need to start saying that they don't know what they're doing, or they're learning, or that they want to be better, but they don't know how to do it yet. Like, there's too much of this like false face on things where they're not, you know, allowing the space to have conversations. And then in the end, you know, we just keep thinking about the end product. So thank you so much for that. Olivia, I want to go to you. Perfect timing.
Go ahead. Did you have something you wanted to ask me specifically? Okay.
No, you go.
I was just going to mention something about humility, and that in the circumstances where I have worked with artistic leaders or leaders of organizations, or even, you know, people in the political realms who show me a humility that levels, again, this playing field of where we're coming from, this willingness to understand that they don't know everything, this willingness from me, and a generosity that I recognize in myself, to be like, I'm gonna go through this with you, and like, let's see if we can hold hands while we figure it out together. I think back to my experience. I was with an organization for 3 years where I was managing an Indigenous artist residency program that, oh my gosh, these amazing artists taught me so much about how colonial the structure itself was, and my willingness to work with their feedback broke things open in such an incredible way that I really feel like that it was the hardest 3 years of my life, but the most opening and the most learning I could have ever experienced, just by getting all of that, all of that feedback. But I mean, like on a really deep level, like these are people who I felt not only responsible to, but responsible with, because they were not, I guess, what am I trying to say here? Because they were not any different than myself, right? But nonetheless, we were working in an organization and a structure that had very colonial values and all that stuff. All of that to say, humility, one of my seventh grandfather teachings, and how awesome it is when you do, find someone who's willing to be in that moment of humility with you, and just recognize that this is how we're going to get through this. Yeah, go, Marion.
The ability to apologize, mean it, and act on their apology is so huge. And any organization I've seen do that is like, okay, I'll work with you again. I make mistakes all the time. And I mean, I would be doing my upbringing a disservice if I didn't learn to actually be humble and feel crappy about making other people suffer because of my mistakes. And I continue to do what I can to learn more and be better. And that's what I want from organizations. I want them to talk to each other. I want them to have better communication. Like, there is an organization called, it's now called the Association for Opera in Canada. I sit on the board. All these opera companies meet weekly to chat about all of the business things that they need to cover. But I keep saying, please also talk about the kinds of shows that I've been involved in with some of your companies that tell Indigenous stories, and learn from each other, so that I don't have to go and re-experience any of these things again. You guys are meeting weekly, share. It will only make you stronger. I'm reminded also that I sang with the National Arts Centre Orchestra last year at the Mushkamo Festival in Ottawa. And there were lots of emails ahead of time. I always read my emails. I don't always respond to them. But one of them was, do you want time with an elder on stage beforehand? And I was like, what? I didn't expect that email to come from a symphony. I didn't really believe it, honestly. And I don't remember if I answered, but when I got there, I was like, by the way, is that elder thing still available? Because I want to do it. And we were on the stage with all of the, like, anybody could go. And there were a few orchestra members who showed up, and we just spent time with an elder, listening and listening to their stories about the land that we were on, and landing in that space in a ceremonial way, which really mattered. And I didn't realize how safe I felt in that they'd gone to that trouble, that they really thought about what, where we were staying, that we were treated like we were important. And that was a really good thing. And I mean, not everybody might have the budget for that, but if you can make it happen, do, because that makes me want to work with them again. And whoever they had as their advisors, I understand that organization has like theater, and like they do talk to each other about things like the Mushkama Festival. It wasn't just about music. So they had advice from people who live it and understand what it is to not feel welcome in a space. But if they just shared that information with the other orchestras across Canada, I would have an easier time wherever I go.
And even just talking about having elders in a space, and having that be something that they, the organization you're being hired by, having them say it and them bring it up, and not be something you have to ask for, it changes the dynamic. Like you're saying, like, you want to work with them again. And also having organizations understand that, yes, there are time limits on things, but also that, elders need time to share the knowledge that they have. And sometimes it's going to take 40 minutes. Sometimes it's going to be 5 minutes. But like, I've seen, different organizations react to that, where you can tell it's very obvious they do or do not understand just the needs of the artists that they're working with, and especially with elders. Like that elder has so much knowledge, and you have to let them speak. If it's going to be 30 minutes, let it happen. I've just, probably many of you have had those experiences where you've seen sort of the opposite of organizations saying there's a time limit of 3 minutes for someone to do a land acknowledgement, and I just think that's such bullshit, to be honest. Like, we can't operate like this. And yeah, Kim, you want to say something?
I think that's incredibly important, and like Marion, what you're saying, I think is so important. And I think that these are becoming the minimums. Like, we need a dialect coach, we need a fight coordinator, we need an elder, we need a wellness table. Like, you would never do a show with a dialect and not be like, well, figure it out, white people, because, we wouldn't position them that way. And yet the racist, and why I think they need to admit it, the racial positioning of BIPOC performers is that it's an addition, or we don't have that budget. And you need to, we don't talk about decolonize your budget forms and your line items to ensure that we don't have to ask, but that's actually approved by your board, and they have the capacity and intelligence to ensure that that's afforded. I think for me, like, again, I think it's just unacceptable for theater leaders to not look at other sectors to understand that these are the necessities for doing business. My university has elders in residence. Young people's programs have elders in residence. Theater, art, music, orchestra, like the way we have accepted the bottom line to be just treated where these are the necessities to get the work done. I think that's the other thing too, where it's like we need to be really conscious of our requests in terms of understanding that this is just what's required to execute on what you're asking me to deliver on. And you need to honor and acknowledge that, and not be rude and do things like you have 3 minutes. I remember, brief anecdote, we were opening a show in Winnipeg, and I can't even say without laughing. It was so generous and so ridiculous. They invited like 4 chiefs to come do a pre-show speech. An hour and 10 minutes after your 10-minute call, the show began. So it was like, we were all backstage, we're completely cold, our costumes are wrinkly, we're eating food, we're like, oh my gosh, like, you don't get 4 chiefs in the same room and don't give them the boundaries to say like, yo folks, you got like 5 minutes. Like, it was just, I remember one of the white actors was like, I'm not being racist or anything, but this is a bit much, right? And we were like, oh yeah, this is absurd. Like, this is so ridiculous. And so we have to be able to not always be the one to say, hey, this is how you do it. And I think it's a disservice in a positioning to like not talk to an elder and do all those things. Just like you would prompt and prime speakers, you have to do that. But these are the nuances and the specificities about becoming culturally competent that I just don't think people are there yet. And I think it's unacceptable. I don't think you should be assuming leadership positions if you can execute on these bare minimums to ensure that artists are being taken care of. Where are the matriarchs councils? Where is the non-binary councils? Where is your Black group? Where is your non-binary circle to inform you, to ensure that you're making decisions that don't harm people? I just think that many other sectors are doing this, and the arts leaders, it's beyond disappointing at this point. And you want to talk about how investing in process actually allows for better outcomes. I think we had 16 days of rehearsal for Kamloopa. We didn't start reading the play until day 3. We ended most days early. We took longer breaks, because if you actually treat people and give them what they need and provide them environment to excel, those women fucking flew. They were energetic. Did we have problems? Absolutely. Did we bear witness to it? Absolutely. And when you talk about building in these times to honor the work, I think that's what Canadian theater and artistic practice fails at often. They don't bear witness, and they don't address challenges when they arise. And that only causes further problems. To ignore something, it metastasizes. When there is a racial instance in an organization, in a process, we have to talk about that. We have to heal that. We have to witness that. And witnessing is something that exists in many Indigenous communities, to say, you know what, Olivia, I bear witness to the fact that what happened there was inappropriate. We failed you. I have to do better. And these are all the things that we are now going to do from this very moment to ensure that your time in my care at this organization will be better. And we apologize, and we're going to work through this together. What do you need? Those moments of witnessing are way too far and few in between, cost so little other than cultural and leadership capacity. And that's where no other industry, I feel like, do our leaders train so little, go to so little professional development, sign up for so little leadership training courses than in the artistic sector, and I'm over it.
I think that all of these things require practice. And the idea of a company decolonizing can only really happen if they practice it. And you can't only put your decolonizing measures into play for the Indigenous shows that you're doing. You have to always do it. And I did write something in the chat earlier, like something like the good advice that we give doesn't only need to apply to your Indigenous shows. It can apply to everything. And that will make everyone safer. It will make sure that when I show up for a gig that has nothing to do with anything Indigenous, that I still feel honored and like people are paying attention to where this is taking place and the people who are still here, who were here first, etc.
Kim, I think you're muted.
In the youth engagement world, they call that weaving the practice into the fabric of the organization. The first thing organizations will do when there's challenges is get rid of the music program in the high school, get rid of the drama department in the high school, get rid of the youth extracurricular activities, because we haven't woven their necessity into the fabric of the organization. And I think I agree with you, Marion. If the decolonial indigenizing work is not completely woven into the fabric of your leadership and your curational programming, then it's just lip service. Then it's so othered, it's so put away, it's so distant, it's so refused to actually embody the work that I don't buy it. But yet you're probably gonna ask for extra money on your next grant for it and put a bunch of pictures of Indians on it to say that we're decolonizing our practice. But hey, you'll get rid of it when the Black people are in favor, or the Latinos or the Asian. And to me, that is worse. Like, don't go near it if you can't actually engage with it in an ethical and meaningful way.
Now, this is not something I prompted any of you with, but I was just thinking that as we've been talking about this, I would love to hear from each of you, and perhaps in a moment, Ty, if you don't mind. I'm wondering, shouting out those organizations that you've worked with who have done really good work, who have had a really positive impact on the work that you've been doing as an artist, as a presenter, as a producer, and because I personally am a big fan of, I keep calling them case studies, but I feel like that comes from academia, just from my experience being in a master's program. But, I like to examine what other people are doing because that's how I have learned. And I have found, just as a teacher too, like whenever I show students examples of things, like what are these, organizations who are doing good work, and it doesn't just have to be organizations, it could be individuals as well. I don't want to say that there's only power in organizations, because that's not true, but our society does often value you more if you have a position with an organization, which I find frustrating. But Ty, I was wondering, do you mind starting? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, that's great. Something that I'm going to tie to what was said a little bit earlier and then segue into it, is that growing up as a student of theater, well, at least a student of Western theater and then a new student of Indigenous storytelling, is that one of the things that we always get taught is that just because a note is not being delivered to you doesn't mean that that note still won't apply to you, which I find so interesting that like theaters don't also then echo that throughout all of their practices. Like if you are able to preach, if this note is being given to Olivia, this might also apply to Kim. If that rhetoric gets shared, that rhetoric should also be shared when you're engaging with these new practices and learning opportunities. And so I do that in the relationships that I have with some of these organizations. When I think of those, I think of Ilnana Diversity Dance Company run by Raven Wings and Cien Yang Lam. They are two individuals who run a QT BIPOC dance program, and they bring in BIPOC mentors and teachers who have been working and existing within the oppressive means of these industries that we've operated in, and they come in and they are able to relate to the participants and let the participants feel seen and heard and valued for their work. So I would offer that they are someone that I continuously aspire to be like and inspired with, because they operate from a right relationship. They have wellness. They incorporate active listeners. They're able to be accessible for folk with visible and invisible disabilities. They honor storytelling outside of this Western standard that we operate in. Another one is where I currently work, Sketch Working Arts. They are trying to dismantle the not-for-profit charity tension that exists with being funded through various places that are using language to continue to oppress. But one of the ways that they do so is that they operate from a transformative justice framework, which is something I learned from there. A lot of the facilitators and coordinators who work at Sketch Working Arts are prison abolitionists. They're someone who continue to want to foster right relationships with all communities, especially marginalized, because our statement, our mandate is that we work with youth 16 to 29 who are street involved. And so what I really value about Sketch operating from this place is that they try to provide and continue to foster access to those who have very little access to very many things. When I think of organizations, I think of that. I would say that there's many organizations who don't do that. But what I will say is that I'm beginning to notice, like Olivia was mentioning earlier, a lot of humility beginning to surface over this last year, especially with the amount of humbling that has come from lack of access due to the pandemic. I would offer those two, I think.
Miigwech. I'm wondering if we could go to Marion and then Olivia after.
Sorry, can you remind me?
Oh, yes, of course.
So involved in listening, I forget.
Essentially, I'm just asking each of you to highlight a few, either one or a few organizations or individuals who you think are doing really great examples of this work, and would be worth, the audience members like checking them out and the work that they do as, yeah.
Yeah. Regina Symphony, doing that right from the beginning of Gordon taking over the position of music director. I've watched them squirm and struggle with the old ways that things were done and realize that when you ask for someone's advice, you have to act on it. And that's just how Gordon is as a person. And so helping the organization, I watched him help the organization understand that. You can't ask for advice and then not take it, especially if it's given freely. I mean, watching Amplified Opera, which began before Asita and I were invited in the spring, but Taya and Arya already had things rolling and had a new way of working, and the way they described wanting to create a company that worked differently, that made us all feel inspired instead of like we're undoing things. That work has been inspiring me ever since we began. Right at the beginning of the pandemic is when I joined. So we have weekly meetings where we talk about process and we talk about how things haven't worked, but how things have worked, and what needs to be amplified and what needs to be done better, and how do we share that information, and how are we responding to companies and the ways that they are and are not working. I guess those are not, there are a lot of companies doing good things. I've worked with but it's more like not necessarily the companies, but the leaders that they bring in to lead the process. So working with Jenny Lauzon, working with Yvette Nolan, these are people who I just like, I know going into that space that they are gonna fight the fight or just do the work that needs to be done in their own individual ways, so that I just have to show up to work and do my job. And it's that's where I just think it's I guess the companies are taking that step to hire powerful people who they know will hold them to account so that the actors can just do their job.
Miigwech, Olivia, and then Kim.
Sure. Yeah, my list was growing as I was listening, and I was like, okay, wait a second, who am I going to presence here? Um, and wanting to, I think, yeah, I think I'm just I'm gonna keep it within the context of organizations who have either supported my work or I know are supporting the work of other Indigenous artists in a really good way. So I'll present Springboard Performance over in Calgary. They were someone who, when I was invited to curate and perform an evening, brought in an elder, and yeah, we held the door for an hour and 15 minutes from start time because we had an awesome session with an amazing elder, and it was so beautiful. Made in BC Dance on Tour, Leicester Center for the Arts up in Prince Rupert, BC, Now Society in Vancouver, Boca del Lupo, Tara Cheyenne Performance, New Works, Vancouver Moving Theater, and then most recently, I just had the amazing, incredible opportunity to work with Jumblee's Art and Theater, and I was so impressed with just the willingness and the openness to, as an Indigenous voice in a bit of a coordinator producer position, working with specifically with Jumblee's and Vancouver Moving Theater for an online residency that occurred just this past month. Wow, yeah, it was in November. We wrapped. The generosity and the openness and the like, hey, we're going to make sure that other Indigenous voices are also being, supported and highlighted here too. And what it showed me was that I looked at them both. I looked at their artistic leaders as like, wow, these are people who are quite a bit older, who have, and by quite a bit older, I'm gonna say, they've lived their lives, but they're like that much more eye open and like ears open and heart open to recognizing what is required to ensure that things are being done in a good way, willing to listen when I had feedback on like, hey, let's slow things down a little bit and like let's make sure that this is actually being done in a good way. Right relations agreements, all that good stuff. But yeah, those are the people I would love to put up there for sure. Thanks.
Miigwech, Olivia. And Kim, do you want to add any organizations or people?
I think for me in theater on the west part of Turtle Island here, the person the institution that's leading the way in terms of the size of theater that they present and the work that they're doing and the investment they've made, I cannot not name Heather Redfern at the Vancouver East Cultural Center. The work that Heather does in terms of supporting mid, large, emerging, independent, smaller community organizations, the humility that leadership team has in terms of knowing that they are non-BIPOC peoples, but required and charged with holding safe space, and the foresight that Heather has had to know that this is not going to be a short-term investment because of Canada 150, because there's a bit of money in the bank to go access. If you actually look at people's track record, I always go back to Bernie Sanders' track records. You can't falsify a track record in terms of what you voted for. His goes back to the 1960s. Heather Redfern's goes back, I would say, a decade in terms of her meaningfully and resourcing Indigenous, Black, and people of color theater, from Agukwe to Urban Inc. to Marie Clements, A Road Forward, to Kamloopa, and to now to culminate and transform, which is now one of, an intersectional, Indigenous, matriarchal centered festival that celebrates BIPOC peoples. To me, was one of the most exciting festivals online that's happened during this pandemic to see. You can't buy that kind of diversity and inclusion work. Heather puts her money where her mouth is. She invests in people and understands that this is about relationships. And, you can call Heather and say, this is what we need. And she's going to do everything, her and her team, Lisa Manel, Nicole McLuckley, to work and ensure that they get you what those people need. This is an institution that I would feel safe bringing my parents in. And I don't say that about a lot of places.
Well, Miigwech, for all of your offerings and everything that each of you have brought to this conversation. It's really been an honor to share this space with each of you. virtually, but I hope to be in spaces in person with you in the future, um, especially Olivia and Kim, who are on the other coast. And I'm going to wrap it up there and just say I hope that everyone follows these fantastic artists, go to their websites, follow them on social media, look at all the work that they are doing, and just support everything that they do. So I'll hand it back to Juliet. Miigwech.
Thank you, everyone. I feel like I'm still digesting everything you've said, and it's fantastic that this is recorded. So, in fact, we can watch it again. Just some really, really powerful messages, challenges to those of us in positions of leadership and responsibility. When we say decolonization, it's not just a word, it's work. And it's work that we can do together. And we all benefit from it. It's not just, yeah, at the end of it. And it's actually, there's no end, it's ongoing. So thank you for all your voices. I'm looking forward to following your creative work, your work as activists. There's some just amazing references in the chat if people want to follow up. And just to invite you back to our next conversation, which happens on January 14th, I believe. I feel like I should just double check before I say that. Yes, January 14th, and that's curated by Remy Sue. So stay tuned, keep watching, keep reading, crack open the spines on those books, and talk to your colleagues about what you're reading. So let's move forward together. Thanks, everyone.